Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined once again by my good friend, Stephen Erikson. Hello, Steve.
Hello. All this was prefaced by AP swearing away because he had a hair in his eye.
Way to ruin the magic of filming and where I get to edit that stuff out of me
Oh,
going,
yeah.
I've got a hair in my eye. I'm just going to edit that out.
I'm sure you are.
So today, Steve, we're going to look at, just as part of this ongoing series, of the two of us discussing and sort of taking apart various scenes that you've written. A scene from Memories of Ice, and I think this is what, chapter 7?
Yeah.
Chapter 7. So this is the introduction of the Itkovian and the rest of the Grey Swords into the story. That's the scene that we're looking at.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about how exposition and info dumping are not entirely the same thing, but that there is a requirement for the writer to actually provide background information, which gives a context to everything you're now watching and seeing. And this opening section is structured in such a way that the reader has the point of view of a character who knows nothing about the characters they're about to meet, but we're coming at it from the point of view of the characters that we don't know yet. And so it's kind of a curious sort of inversion, but the obvious reasons for doing it. So
yeah, because the exposition is necessary in narrative, particularly for fantasy worlds which have complex societies that you cannot assume reader foreknowledge of. So you need exposition, and it can be done boldly, where it is just dumped into the narrative, where you have huge paragraphs of just information about the world, hence the term information dumping, info dumping. But info dumping and exposition, from a reader's perspective, from analyzing this, they're not the same. Conveying information to the reader, all text conveys information to the reader.
Yep.
Be it dialogue, be it internal monologue, be it descriptive passages. But info dumping, it used to be in science fiction, they had the well, Bob paragraphs, which was when the knowledgeable scientist or whoever it was would turn to their companion and go, well, Bob, how about this thing? And it would just be a page of the author getting across all of the information. And you go, that's where info dumping came from. But the integration of exposition into narrative is not the same. Exposition and info dumping are not the same things. Info dumping is exposition. Exposition is not necessarily info dumping. One is negative.
Yeah. I think it's probably defined in some ways on an individual basis, the sense of whether the information that is being provided jumps out at the reader in an awkward fashion. But at the same time, I mean, info dumping I think it's more noticeable when that's the only purpose it serves, is to provide background. And if you can actually deconstruct info dumping and sort of decide, well, this information needs to be conveyed because this is providing the context for the story I'm about to tell and for the characters in that story. But rather than simply, dump it all down there, and bear in mind, this is the third book in the series. So by this point, I'm assuming the reader is with me. And so if I'm going to then provide background information, it's going to have to be very sort of circumspect in some ways. And it's going to have to be information that is essential, but is not extraneous to the moment, or essential to the novel in any case. And then I simply have to rely on the reader to trust in me to actually give you the reasons for why I provided that information sooner or later. in the novel. And then, you can deconstruct info dumps on another side where you want to be providing that information, but you want to provide it buried within other crucial elements of the storytelling. So character relationships, dialogue, two characters meeting for the first time is obviously, for the writer, a perfect opportunity in which to have characters state their position or define themselves in such a fashion that they would not normally do with each other, because that's already taken as given that they know these things. And it's the balance you always have is in the battle that, you've got Whiskey Jack and his squad, and they don't have to describe things to each other. They don't have to explain who they are and their roles in that squad. That is all given. So then it falls on the author to convey those roles through other points of view and through other people seeing them and people meeting them for the first time and that kind of thing. And this is the scene where we meet the Grey Swords. I think it's for the first time or pretty close. Yeah. And the point of view chosen is Carnatus, which is one of the triad of power within that mercenary company, but not at the pinnacle, because that's Bruchalion. And we don't, Bruchalion is the third one met of the three. And in a sense, you've got Carnatus initially, and then we get a very sort of mysterious appearance of Eccovian, who doesn't stay very long in the scene. And he's actually where everything is going to be landing. And so there are expectations set up by choosing Carnatus as the point of view, especially given that, spoilers here, obviously, Carnatus is not going to survive the entire exchange in this novel, nor is Bruchalion. So the mysterious figure of Eccovian is actually the one that we're going to end up following. And so in a sense, it's kind of a shell game that's going on. But by this point, I would hope the reader is at least suspending judgment on, which characters I'm going to, they're going to hold on to, or which ones I'm going to stay with. But it's interesting because this section opens with evocations of the Iliad. And that's not accidental at all. And I used the wind to actually permeate the entire scene on top of the parapet. And it's sort of the background, noise of history, if you will, that's sitting there, that then ties into the descriptions of the city of Capustan and the palace and all the rest. So,
yeah, because I do love that, born on a sea dark as spiced wine, because that the wine dark sea being that classic example from the Greek epics.
Yeah.
And wasn't it something to do with the fact that they had no proper word for blue?
Yeah.
And that was the closest they got to it, was that purpley color of wine.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the reasons for choosing that, I've often said the Iliad was a huge inspiration for the entire series, but for this novel, I chose it, I got as close to it, in terms of referencing the Iliad. This is probably the closest I get anywhere. But I wanted to sort of convey that there is an element of almost antiquity, or there's something unusual about the Grey Swords in their mannerisms. And there is something of the Greek heroic element to them. Where warfare is their calling, in the same fashion that a religion would be to someone else. And so, with the Grey Swords, you've got a holy order here. You've got, Templars, and so I wanted that sort of meshing of the sacred and the profane, which is all through the Iliad, in terms of the relationship of the warriors with the gods. And so all of that is sort of trying to evoke the echoes of it in the opening sections.
Because obviously just to take this opening paragraph, born on a sea dark as spiced wine, the wind moaned its way across the seaside killing ground, over and around the east watch on its low brick-strewn hill, where faint torchlight glimmered from the fortress's battered shutters. Or battened shutters, sorry. The wind's voice rose in pitch as it rolled up against the city's mortarless walls, flinging salty spray against its rounded weathered stone. Rising then, the night's breath reached the battlements and swept between the merlons and along the platforms, then down into Capistan's curving, undulating streets where not a soul stirred. So it's this sweeping description that's moving through with the wind. So we get that almost sense of a bird's eye view flying down through. If you think of like a camera in film of sweeping along down toward a city and then going into the city, it's that sense of movement because you've sort of pinned the point of view almost to the wind as it's flying through. And we get Capistan, we get the name of the city, we get the sense of this whole tone of oncoming violence because of the emphasis on the fortress, the battened shutters, even like the East Watch brick strewn, with the wind's voice rose in pitch, battlements. All of these sorts of things are emphasizing this hunkered down nature of trying to defend against something that is external. So obviously that's prefiguring and foreshadowing the oncoming Panian Domin attack.
Yeah, I mean, they're already under siege. It's just the weather is besieging them at the moment. Yeah. And the weather is an implacable force, and so is the Panian Domin.
And then obviously in the second paragraph, that's where you introduce Carnatus, because Carnatus stood facing the storm alone, his boar-maned cloak whipping in the savage gusts. So you set up the physical scene, you've set up tone in that first paragraph, and then it is carried on because now we've moved to the corner tower parapet. So we know where we are in Capistan, and we get introduced to this figure that is standing there alone with his cloak flapping away in the wind, looking out across the vista, his hair being tousled gently.
Not gently, but yes.
But it's that classic zooming in on the figure looking out. So it's that strong evocation of, I wouldn't say cliche, but of that very iconic sort of image of someone standing on battlements alone. And it's a very powerful image. And I think it's nice because it gives us, this is now obviously our point of view. So everything is done in those opening 2 paragraphs of the chapter.
Well, the curious thing is, I mean, one could say, well, do these chapters constitute an info dump? And I think it can be easy to confuse details of setting with info dumps. Because in describing setting, you're providing background information in which to place the character. So it is information in that sense. And you can put a lot into that in the description of the setting to actually provide additional connotative information to the context of where they are. So yeah, there's elements of me taking the map of Capistan and making sure that I've got things right in terms of the direction he's facing and all the rest. Which for me is more providing setting to create verisimilitude of some form, so that we are standing there, we're feeling the wind on our faces and all the rest. And then, yeah, then you switch to the actual character point of view, but the wind has not left us. So, in a sense, you've got 2 forces here that are going to continue in the scene, at least until they step inside, which is both Carnatus and the wind.
So we move through those first two paragraphs, then are followed up in the third paragraph again by giving this additional information about setting. So the brooding cliff-like palace. So a lot of it is physical description, but you keep going back to flavoring the description with that very martial eye to it. And that obviously makes sense for who Carnatus is. He views everything in terms of the military aspect. Yeah. So even that initial description, because it is actually from Carnatus's perspective, he's our point of view character. He's the one looking out and taking all of this in. That actually explains why so much of this description has been framed in terms of military, and why he keeps looking at these things in terms of the confusion of planes, angles, overhangs, and seemingly pointless ledges, because he has this very rational mind looking at the military aspects and thinking about it as defensible, because it rose well above the flanking coast-facing wall. And in his mind's eye, the mercenary watched huge boulders arcing towards it from the killing field beyond, crashing into its side, sending the whole edifice down into ruin. Everything about this is being evaluated from his military strategic perspective.
Yeah, and then of course this is the first mention of mercenary as well, isn't it? So yeah, you sort of you build up the identifiers for the character, sort of step by step. If I were to say, write this as the gray sword mercenary Destrian Carnatus stood facing the storm alone, et cetera, you'll see that in books. I mean, and I probably have used something similar on occasion. But to me, that's a much more awkward info dump than to actually slowly work my way in with the wind, to provide those, specific details, step by step.
Yeah, we see you do like a variant of this a couple of paragraphs later, because within the palace, the mortal sword Bruchalion was marred in yet another meeting.
Yeah,
and the gray sword's commander. So because one sentence describes him as the mortal sword, then the next sentence, which is obviously referring to the same person, describes him as the gray sword's commander. We get both pieces of information, but you split them out. So it's not just a lump of text dumped into the middle of the sentence.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've already shifted into internal monologue for Carnatus. So we've been sort of set up already that we're going to be very much seeing all of this from Carnatus' point of view. But of course, the problem that then poses is that Carnatus knows exactly who Bruchalion is, and Etcovian and Prince Jellican and the entire political situation, which is why it's going to be important when Quickman arrives to provide that kind of information to the reader, because Quickman doesn't know who he's talking to initially.
Yeah, but you, even with that constraint, so you have the line, the Grey Sword's commander forbore such tangled marathons with what seemed to Carnatus superhuman patience. And then it switches to his internal monologue. I would never have suffered this spider-bitten dance, not this long, not night after night, weeks on end. So by shifting into it, we get a sense of Bruchalion having patience, that he's the commander. We get a sense of his ability not to lose his temper, whereas Carnatus is coming across as much more fire and fury. That even in this, he goes, yeah, he admits he doesn't have the patience. So we get a sense of who these characters are through the contrast that Carnatus is thinking about.
Yeah, yeah. So is this info dumping?
Well, I wouldn't describe this as info dumping, because this is, for me, and it will change reader to reader, because if a reader feels that the exposition is very bold-faced. If it is just lumped down into the middle of the text, it will feel like an info dump. And here you're conveying a lot of information very, very quickly. But for me, this isn't info dumping because it's being worked into the description. It's being worked into a moment where a character is actually surveying the whole thing, and he's waiting on his commander, and he's thinking about why his commander's late. And all of that information is being fed to us as reader through a natural means. An info dump to me is something that feels very unnatural, that it is artificially inserted into the narrative. Whereas if, even with all of the same information that you would ascribe to an info dump, if it has been integrated, if it has been blended into a scene, then to me, it does not read as an info dump, because exposition is exposition. Yes, this is exposition, but it has been blended. So that's where I make the distinction.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. You have to, as the author, you're obliged to provide enough information to have the scene in front of you make some kind of sense. I don't think the obligation goes much beyond that, but that scene that you're reading has to make sense in some fashion, which means you need to provide enough context. And there's sort of kind of a checklist where if you're going to have more than one character, then we need to get a sense of the relationship between the two characters. If you're tied to one point of view, then that is the filter by which you see the other character, which then establishes their relationship to each other. If you're going to stay with that point of view and then introduce a stranger, then you have to sort of look at that new character as a stranger would look at, as somebody you don't know. And so the things you're thinking about, the things you're observing, are going to be different from that of, say, Carcanus observing Brucalion, because so much is already taken as given there. So in that sense, you have to, I mean, Carcanus and his relationship with Brucalion has to be set up before we get to Quickben, because that relationship, the familiarity of these three characters, Itcovian, Brucalion, and Carcanus with each other, has to be set up, and it has to be explained, if you will, before we can get to the new character of Quickben.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see in just following on from that, we have, in his mind's eye rose the fur-painted, articulated mask of the one priest of the council he and the company should have been able to count on as an ally. So you're setting up about the mass council, all of these priests. So you're setting up that the Grey Swords should be linked to these priests. Rath Fenner spoke for the Boar of Summer, the Grey Sword's own patron god. So again, you've dropped this information in. You've pointed out the Boar of Summer is the Grey Sword's own patron god, but you've done it in a way that Rath Fenner spoke for the Boar of Summer. Our own patron god is essentially what you're saying. So it's, while it is information being conveyed to the reader, it's worked in, and again, some people might feel that that is artificial, but at the same time, there's a reason and an excuse, and it fits. So it doesn't.
Well,
feel, it doesn't feel artificial.
No, it's because when he says he spoke for the Boar of Summer, Rath Fenner, it's almost ironic because Carcanus is objecting to the presumption. So there's politics already sort of sewn into all of this, and that's why you get a sense through this that Carcanus is actually offended by Rath Fenner, and given the option, he would put him down pretty quickly.
And I think that comes across because in the previous line you had should have been able to count on as an ally. Therefore, the implication is they cannot count on him as an ally. So why should they have been able to count on him? Because Rath Fenner spoke for the Boar of Summer, the Grey Sword's own patron god. But political ambition consumes you, as it does your rivals in the council. You kneel before Summer's bloody tusk, yet is it naught but a lie? So we get his questioning of Rathfenner's belief. But in all of this, you've actually managed to articulate who Rathfenner is, what the Council of Masks are, the fact that it's about secular political ambition rather than genuine religious belief, and that the Grey Swords, a military order dedicated to the Boar of Summer, to Fenner, can't count on their representative on the council, because there's this whole, it's not all one monolithic faith. And
No.
all of that is communicated in such a short space of writing, that while someone might say, oh, but it's pointing out that, you know, the Grey Swords worship Fenner, but as an info dump, there's so much more going on in that short 2 sentences or 3 sentences that I think dismissing stuff like this as an info dump is kind of missing the point of what the writing is actually doing and actually communicating.
Yeah, you have to provide information, and if you can do more with it than just provide the information, to me, then it's not an info dump. Yeah. In my mind, you know, if I'm rereading this and doing editing on my own text, I need to make sure that there's a lot more going on. That's so the information is seamlessly sort of kind of woven into everything that's happening. With, you know, the immediacy of the scene actually takes precedent, and so the other stuff is, it's just there. It's there for context, and it's only what you need for the scene. So I think it's already being set up that the Grey Swords, while working to defend the city of Kapistan, are not synonymous with the rulers of Kapistan. So they're stuck in the middle, which means they're in a kind of a political no man's land when Quickben and company make contact. So
and because obviously Carnatus in this opening, like, this goes on for a number of paragraphs where you slowly develop this. So, you know, it can, I think this is the kind of thing that could be misconstrued. And again, I keep saying it comes down to an individual reading of it, I think, for a lot of people. But, you know, this is a section where a character is standing there contemplating what is currently going on, essentially for the benefit of the reader. But at the same time, you know, another way of communicating that information could have just been a big long set of paragraphs where you didn't bother putting a character in, where you just had the narrator give you the information. And this, because of how it is framed, because of how it is integrated, that is why I keep coming back to the fact that I don't think this is an example of an info dump. This is an example of exposition. If you had just written from the beginning who Carnatus was, who Rathfenner was, and you did it all from the position essentially of an omniscient narrator, just filling in line after line of text to set the scene, but with no character involved, no internal monologue, no framing it, no tying it to perspective, no using that perspective to alter and emphasize certain aspects of the perception of setting, and you didn't do anything with tone. You go, yeah, that would just be bald exposition dropped into the text. And this does not feel all the way through, or this doesn't feel at all like that kind of thing, because everything here is so heavily colored by his perception of the events.
Yeah, it goes back to an aspect of writing narrative. You can find examples, especially, you know, last few decades, or maybe a few decades ago, where the narrative voice is the preeminent, recognizable persona in a story being told. And I don't just mean first person stuff. Narrative voice can be there if it then provides information similar to what you just described, where the invisible narrator is no longer invisible, but has stepped onto the page and is providing you with information. Now that can be done incredibly effectively if that narrator is, for example, in the British tradition, ironic and sarcastic. And so you can see that kind of stuff, and it can be fabulous. I think it's a bit out of style these days, but this entire series it's an invisible narrator. The narrator subsumes any kind of tonal quality or attitude to the point of view character of that scene, of any particular scene. In a sense, I surrender entirely to that point of view, and so I disappear. The character then takes over the narration. So in that sense, I guess, yeah, there's no place in this narrative approach for an info dump. There's no place for it. I mean, when I do mess around with that stuff, info dumps may appear as epigraphs at the beginning of chapters, because there I'm free to do that because it's a scholar, it's, you know, a historian, it's somebody with a huge, you know, stake, it's, you know, something at stake regarding something, and they can just go to town. So that's where expositional stuff really can just fly out there. And I did that early in Gardens of the Moons. It's all there as info dumps. But most people, you know, or a lot of people just skipped right past the epigraph, so they never noticed them. Sometimes I told the whole entire story in the epigraph.
But
so,
in the defense of people who did read it and didn't realize you told the whole story, it's not like you've just laid it all out there. It is coded.
Yeah.
Stop trying to make people feel bad.
No, the point is, when you do the epigraphs, or when I do them, I make myself entirely conscious of the bias of that particular point of view, and so that everything that is written in there is suspect. And then once I'm aware of that, then I can start really messing around with it. And you're right. I mean, in the sense of those epigraphs, it's not a question even of not reading them. Even if you read them, they'll only make sense on the reread. You know? So they're there for me in a sense. They're just sort of, you know, I'm going to have some fun here with respect to rereads. But apart from that, yeah, a lot of them are left, you know, little floating islands on the lake.
Yeah. Weirdly enough, I've never asked you this before. Do you always write the epigraph for a chapter before you write the chapter, or do you sometimes put the epigraph in after you've written the chapter?
No, it always precedes. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it helps me provide a focus, at least on the subtextual levels, thematic levels of what I'm going to be talking about. But sometimes it's just an ironic comment on the section or the chapter I'm going to write. I know, you know, that can be a lot of fun. I did notice here after the in his mind's eye paragraph, this is for just sort of for people who are wanting to be writers and working on writing. I bring the wind back, and the next line is the wind howled, the only answer to Carnata's silent question. And so it's not just bringing the wind back as a physical force, but I pull it into its internal mindset. So the sentence is not just the wind howled period, but it links back up to the previous, you know, internal thoughts of the character. And that's how you can take setting and use the setting to help provide the emotional framework for that particular point of view that you're doing. So it's not just setting, it's setting that serves a second purpose, which is actually characterization.
Yeah, and it's sort of playing around with pathetic fallacy as well.
Yes, all over the place. Yeah.
Because, you know, it's
but you can do that,
have,
right?
Sorry?
Well, you can do that if your point of view is fully pulled into a character. If your narrator voice is actually a dominant, overarching, series spanning voice that is a personality, then pathetic fallacy really is awful, right? You can't get away with it unless you're being ironic, right? So
well, I don't know. I mean, like Glenn Cook's Black Company, written that very distinctive narrative voice that Croker uses for the Chronicles.
And
so because there is that framework that Croker is both a character, but he's also ostensibly the narrator. And Cook uses that very dry voice, not necessarily always ironic.
No, but what it is it's formalized, right?
Yeah.
So it's juxtaposed with Croker. Once you get to know Croker, you realize that, his annals are mostly nonsense, right? In a sense. And he knows that that's the role he has to play. And so he's always got that, there's a dramatic tension between the annals and Croker. And that's what's so fantastic about it. Yeah.
But I thought that's an interesting one to bring up, because like that is a very strong narrative voice and a very strong narrative tone that, and I think you're right, it has fallen out of favor. Whereas, if you think of the number of books that had that knowing narrator, who basically was making fun of the characters on the page, and that sort of style of a very dominant narrative voice just doesn't seem as popular anymore.
No, I think of Flashman, in the Flashman papers of George MacDonald Fraser. I mean, that is sort of the ultimate piss take on that kind of narration. But also he's entirely self-aware of his own, his own worst flaws, put it that way. But, even in Glenn Cook's Black Company, the second book opens entirely different in terms of its narrative tone and sets up something else entirely, which I thought was just fabulous. You get the point of view of this character who actually doesn't feel confident about anything, but then by the time you get to the end of the book, you realize he is as badass as anybody out there, and he's taking on these immense powers and holding them in check, and that was very, very well done. It's really cool stuff.
So going back to this chapter then,
right?
So we have the end of sort of Carnatus's introspection, this opening where he thinks to himself, "Patience, Carnatus, that time will come." I love the way he's referred to himself in his own head in the third person.
Yeah, well, they're very formal, right? And they'll call each other sir, regardless of rank. They refer to everybody that way. So I wanted that formality, that sort of antiquated diction coming from these characters. And if you have grown up in that antiquated diction, then your internal monologue will match it. It has to match it, right? Otherwise, if it doesn't, then it means that the character, it has to match it for Carnatus because he is a believer. If the person's not a believer, then the internal monologue would actually undercut all the formality of the spoken word, but not for Carnatus. So does that make sense?
Yeah, and again, it feeds into using insights into the character as a way to promote characterization. But also, as you illustrated, if Carnatus's thoughts, if he wasn't a true believer, if he wasn't fully dedicated to this entire order and how they did things, you can actually use the internal thoughts then to do something very different, because then as he is speaking, that is clearly an affectation and not something he believes. So you can play around with that so neatly by sort of generating this understanding of what the character is and what they believe.
Yeah, and if he had been a cynic, I could not have opened this section the way I did, in the formalized language and all of the descriptions. That would not have fit with somebody who is actually dismissive. Maybe I could have done it by focusing entirely on the strategic aspects of the city. Possibly, he even a cynical character who's a soldier will move into that tactical mode of mind of thinking when they're looking around. But then I would not have been able to attach any emotions to the wind whatsoever. So and everything has to be seamless. That all has to fit. It has to fit, because everything starts from the point of view. and the internal landscape is what shapes the external landscape that is being described within that section.
See, in some ways, I actually disagree with that, because I think you could do this sequence with a cynical Carnatus who had assumed this position. He had the military training, but he wasn't a true believer. It was more like the secular aspects that you explore with Rath Fenner. But you would change, the wind then would be noted as it's always blowing from that direction. And then that leads his eye to think of how that's going to affect. And you would go into that strategic mode, and you would link the wind then to something that is irritating, to something that is a problem to be solved. And that would lead you then into his thoughts about Rath Fenner and how Rath Fenner is a problem to be solved. I think you could still do it.
Except Rath Fenner is no longer a problem. He's actually, the whole issue of Carnatus is discussed on the politics would completely be undercut, because if he is cynical, he would be doing the same kind of thing within his own sphere of influence.
Except Rath Fenner is setting himself up in opposition to what the Grey Swords want to do. So a cynic would see him as an obstacle to be removed and would see it as a strategic thing, but not as we should be deferential to him and he should be giving us support. You would reframe it in terms of strategic and in terms of, right, we should just get rid of him because he's not a real priest anyway.
And the reason why that cannot work for the Grey Swords is that they are set up to actually accept the last stand, which the cliche and the trope of the mercenary is that they will never do that.
Yeah.
They'll bail before. And I needed to set up early on that this is a crew that's not going to bail. So yeah, that's the reason why. So yes, I could have, but it wouldn't have worked for where they were heading, right? Subtextually. Yeah,
but, and again, I think even like us arguing about that point, I think it's an interesting way to discuss it. Yeah. Because yeah, you could have done all of those things that I just said, but ultimately with where they go in the story, it may have caused a problem then.
It would have. And this is what I would say to writers who are working on, working in terms of a novel, that you have to, once you set something up, you have to follow in your mind. You have to jump ahead and follow it through and say, what does this portend? Where is this leading in terms of sort of the emotional investment of the story? And you want that stuff to make sense. You don't, I mean, yes, you can undermine things, but you then have to undermine the undermining. It starts getting really complicated. But in terms of, when I'm explaining that the reason why this scene is the opening scene for the Grey Swords, and as the author, I already know where they're going to end up. I know what's going to happen. I haven't written it yet by that point, but I know what's coming. And that has to actually feed back into the narrative tone and the style you use and the characters you create within that, so that it all fits into place. So that there's a sense of, I guess this is what I'm saying, as a writer, you want to create a sense of inevitability, even if the reader cannot predict what's coming. Once it's arrived, the reader thinks it couldn't have happened any other way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, why don't we move on to how Itkovian gets introduced here, because there's an interesting tension between Itkovian and Carnatus. So Carnatus is standing there, and then obviously he's in his thoughts, and then we see, is this a welcome night, Destriant? Ah, Itkovian, I did not see you there in the gloom. 'Tis the boar's storm this night. So how long have you stood there, shield anvil? And then it goes into internal monologue. How long in your cold, closed-in fashion have you stared upon your high priest? Black-mannered Itkovian, will you ever unsheath your true self?
And this is all Iliad. This is all Homeric, right? The fact that bearing in mind that the Iliad and the Odyssey, but especially the Iliad, employ mnemonic devices because they were originally oral tradition. They were told as a story, and the oral tradition invokes, in terms of a kind of almost a repetition, a transition phrase that are mnemonic devices. So I think we had well, I mean, the very opening, isn't it? It's Wine Dark Sea is one of them, but there are many others, and so that poetic sort of license, if you will, has to be part of the internal thoughts as well of these characters. So I remember, I can actually remember the fact that it was around here I sort of thought, well, I really want to throw in those kind of evocations, like Black Mannered, all like just sort of to I guess to underscore the Homeric aspects of these characters, because I mean, if you think about it, they really are, they are the Trojans. They're the ones that are going to make that last stand, aren't they? So that all needs to be there.
And even if you don't pick up on the fact that the Homeric references, like, it is certainly a sense of heavily formalized archaicism. So it gives you that, what the sense that you're going to with the Homeric reference, you're still getting from the language, because it is slightly archaic, it is heavily formal, and it's almost, not, I wouldn't say stilted, but it has that almost stentorian feel of
Absolutely.
Repressed emotion.
Yeah, and it edges on the overblown, especially on the internal, but they all are. I mean, these are these are priests who who deny themselves all sort of normal behaviors and emotions and pleasures and all the rest. So they're repressed, and so it's got to show up somewhere, right?
But I was
and hold on, and Itkovian is the most repressed of all, and that's why we see him as we do, because he doesn't unlock things until, as you know, much later.
But what I thought was curious about this is obviously Bruchalion, Carnatus, and Itkovian are the triumvirate that lead the Grey Swords. Yeah?
Yeah.
But Carnatus refers to Itkovian as black-mannered. This unsheath your true self, so the idea that Itkovian is hiding something, that cold, closed-in fashion, that you would think, it gives this impression that Carnatus does not trust Itkovian.
He does not know Itkovian.
Well, I'm telling you, it comes across that he doesn't trust him.
That's fine. That's fine. I like that. I like that. And because so, Itkovian is already, I mean, foreshadowing the fact that Itkovian has an internal world that is constrained and is not released to others until the time when it's freaking released, right?
Yeah, and thinking of Itkovian's journey in the novels, I can understand. So, like, on a reread, looking at this, to go, I see what you were doing with this. But just looking at the language, you get this sense that Carnatus doesn't trust him, which seems strange, because obviously Itkovian is one of this triumvirate. And Carnatus has already pointed out that they don't trust Rath Fenner. So because of the suspicion about Rath Fenner in the preceding paragraphs, and then this cold, closed-in criticism and black-mannered criticism of Itkovian, there is at least running through it, linking that, perhaps wrongly, that suspicion of Rath Fenner is being linked now down to Itkovian. So that's where I'm getting distrust, rather than Itkovian is unknowable.
Yeah, and the distrust is fine, because I actually am inviting the reader to distrust as well, because where where Covian is going thematically and his journey. If it were explained in a very straightforward fashion kind of now, well, who would trust that? I mean, as a reader, who would trust any of that? Who would trust a person who is stating outright that they will take on board all of this, all of your pain, all of your whatever, right? It sounds too good to be true. And so that really, I do want the reader to actually buy into our Carnatus's thinking at this point regarding Itcovian. And I want Itcovian to remain a cipher. And as such, Carnatus being so all about being, trying to piece together internal politics and motivations of other people, and is wondering, for about Rath Fenner, etc. I want that kind of modern skepticism to be, the voice, to be behind the voice of our Carnatus in this.
Okay. Well, just to pick up on a different point. So obviously, is this a welcome night destriant? So we've already had mortal sword. Now, mortal sword as a term, can be worked out. The sword, but a mortal and incarnate. So the weapon of a god, the mortal weapon of a god. So mortal sword, easy to work out. Destriant.
Well, back up. Shield anvil comes first. Comes before that.
Oh.
No, but what I'm indicating is that mortal sword makes sense. Shield anvil, you can kind of work it out. It sounds protective in any case, because the sword is the weapon of attack, but the shield is the weapon of defense. And then we go to destriant, and you go, what the fuck's destriant? Yeah.
Yeah. So why pick destriant?
Okay, imagine if I had done it the other way around. Destriant first, you go, what the fuck's destriant? And then you go shield anvil. Well, yeah, and then mortal sword. The order in which those titles are given does not make sense logically. I'd be reversing it for the wrong reasons or no reasons. But to go from, also I'm walking down the hierarchy as well, which is to indicate that Itcovian is actually between Bruchalion and Carnatus in the hierarchy. He's actually kind of second in command. Although it's a bit of a gray area. Anyways, destriant, you know what? I made the fucking word up. Probably then and there.
Okay. I was honestly hoping that there was like some sort of, oh well, I was using the root of blah blah blah.
Maybe if subconsciously, but no, not consciously. Just made it up.
That sorted that out. So we have a nice exchange between Itcovian and Carnatus. So obviously, so we just had, is this a welcome night destriant? And it's, Itcovian, I did not see you there in the gloom. 'Tis the boar storm this night. So how long have you been there, shield anvil? And then we had that internal monologue followed by, there was no way to read the man's expression in the darkness. Moments only, destriant. Does sleep elude you, sir? Not when I seek it.
Yeah. So yeah, he turns aside everything that Carnatus throws at him.
So I will say, when I was reading this the first time, even though you had the Wine Dark Sea reference at the beginning, I still read this as more Shakespearean rather than Homeric. And that's it. Probably, does sleep elude you, sir? Not when I seek it. And it just reminded me of, do you bite your thumb at me? I do bite my thumb, sir, but not at thee, sir. Like that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That formalized language. So even though you were going for Homeric, I was getting Shakespearean.
Well, I mean, people view Shakespearean as formalized language, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though it probably wasn't at the time.
Well, the iambic pentameter is obviously an artificial meter.
Yeah, but that goes back to the Greek stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Weren't they? Wasn't it a tetrameter?
Could be.
I don't know.
I've seen it. I've seen it translated in iambic pentameter as well. So.
Well, yeah. Obviously, in translation, you then pick a style that you're translating it into.
Yeah.
I might have to ask Philip Chase about it. He's studying.
Yeah. Good idea.
So we have this sort of sparring between the two of them, and obviously you've set Itkovian up, and he constantly deflects the Carnatus's questions
because he's the shield anvil. Yes.
So Carnatus, I had not realized it was so close to dawn. Do you anticipate being gone for long? Itkovian shrugged. No, assuming they have indeed crossed in strength, I am restricted to leading but 2 wings in any case. Should we come upon little more than scouting parties, however, then the first blows against the domain shall be made. So he's actually, a wee bit verbose there for Itkovian.
Mm-hmm. Because it's tactical. It's the instructions he's been given by Bruchalion. So is that info dumping? I don't know. I mean, I don't see it as it. They're having a freaking conversation and they're seeking clarification from each other on what they're going to do next. So
to me, it would have been closer to info dumping if it had been Itkovian shrugged. No, I have been ordered by what's the other guy called?
Bruchalion?
So no, Bruchalion has ordered that I am to lead just 2 wings, and so therefore, if they have, if you'd fed in that very artificial of yes, I have been given my orders. This is the person who gave me the orders. I am now relaying the information to you about who gave me the orders, even though you would know who gave me the orders. This is solely for the purpose of the reader. That's what, in my mind, would start tipping the balance towards info dumping.
Also, I mean, if you back up when Carnatus says, I had not realized it was so close to dawn, that's our first indication that dawn's even coming. So that's, again, you're providing specific details on the timing of this thing. And so Carnatus has possibly spent most of the night staring out into the darkness. And then that sort of falls back, or it knocks back to that notion of when he discovers Itkovian, he doesn't know how long he's been standing there. And for all he knows, he's been standing there all night as well, which would be pretty creepy if you think about it.
Well, the two of them just sort of, I just imagine the two of them like staring off and then sort of like slowly look around and go, oh God, you were actually standing there. How long have you been there? I thought I was the only one staring off poetically into the darkness.
Yeah. They look down the line of the wall and there's 50 other Greece swords staring at it. Because they all know they're Homeric. Yes, I get that.
So then we have the two of them sort of, I like this, and he has sat patiently waiting whilst we chatted. And I love this inclusion of the word chatted, this chastisement. So it's, what then, may I ask, has brought you up here, shield anvil? The mortal sword has returned from the latest gathering. He wishes to speak with you. And Carnatus has turned the word chatting into a criticism because and he has sat patiently waiting whilst we chatted. And Itkovian is either oblivious to this or just doesn't care, because I would imagine so, Destrian. And it's this I don't care that you're annoyed. I came up, I was about to tell you that thing. We've exchanged pleasantries for about 30 seconds. Yes, he's waited.
Yeah. Which was, again, indicates Itkovian's relationship to both Carnatus and Bruchalion is still a cipher. He's certainly not one who I guess, sort of bows to the needs of the others, which is quite ironic because that's where he's headed. Yeah.
But it's because looking at that language, you know, someone could look at that and very superficially say that you shouldn't have used the word chatted because that is too informal a register for what you've established for Carnatus. And yet, because it is this criticism,
it's a pejorative. Yeah,
he's using it pejoratively. So it's actually, even though it is an informal term, it's how he is using it makes it appropriate for what he is using it for.
Yeah.
And you know, that is one of the things sometimes when editing that you actually have to pay very close attention at times to the context of usage instead of just dismissing it and going, that's wrong for that character. Sometimes the tone or how the character is using it actually makes the improper choice the proper choice, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it may also be a very British thing. I'm trying to think back now, but certainly, you know, when I moved to the UK, I really had a sense of this. The sensibilities of that culture are very different from that of Canada and the United States, especially when it comes to verbal exchanges and understatement, irony, and the way that the lexicons of the various classes are freely used by all the classes, but when they're used with different meaning, with different purpose. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, a toff talking about, in this context, about, I don't know, the modern equivalent to chatting as a pejorative, delivers that usage for a very different purpose. I remember, you know, the memes coming out about, I guess I don't know, East End London accent of you know, think instead of think and that kind of thing. And if a talk were to use it, well, they're not using it the same way that somebody on the East End would be using it. So maybe I was picking up all that kind of stuff. And so in the sense of the use of chat here, it's underscoring just how pejorative Carnatus is using it versus, say, Quickben. Because, you know, Quickben's about to arrive and he's all about chatting. You know, his diction is completely different. So after I would imagine So Distraught, we move into the transition in 2 paragraphs. So I know, I remember when I was in workshops, there would always be discussions about transitions and how do you pull off a transition. And I remember one of my instructors, Jack Hodgins, I think it was, talking about how, I think it may have been Virginia Woolf, it may have been somebody like that, but it would take her, or you know, it would take her 4 pages to move a character from one room to the next, which is an exaggeration, but transitions are crucial in narrative, and yet they can be very difficult because that is where you're suddenly carrying the burden of shifting the scene that you've already set and creating basically a new scene, but carrying the characters through. And if every one of the transitions is that he walked into the next room, it gets pretty boring pretty quickly. So that, you know, I remember early on trying to figure out all the different ways of transitioning from one setting to the next through narrative. And, you know, you have to do it because it's what sews the story together, is the transitions. If you didn't have transitions, I mean, quite often one of the stylistic techniques now is you just throw in your little break, your 3 stars or your 5 stars, and then you create a new scene. But I always try to sort of, those ones are for what I consider the major breaks, either time, or place and or characters. And then, but within a specific scene, within that block of narrative between those kind of breaks, you're always going to be facing other kinds of transitions. And so this is one example of simply taking the two characters and following them and providing visual details and various other details, but especially visual. Well, I've got the chill as well, so that's kind of there. And yeah, you can use, you know, a multitude of senses when you're doing this, as long as you're tied to that point of view of Carnatus. But this is a case where I psychically step back anyways, because now I'm the two gray swords. They're not even named at this point. So I'm subsuming the two characters to place emphasis on the setting as we carry them down into the bowels of the building they're in.
So yeah, I was going to pick up on that because if you think almost cinematically, we've had these very close-in shots of the two of them talking, so you can almost visualize it as this dialogue with the shots going, you know, face to face, or the two shots are the shot of the two faces facing each other. And then we get the two gray swords turned to the tower's spiral stairs. So it's the camera's moved all the way back, and now it's two figures that they've been depersonalized.
Mm-hmm.
We know it's still the same two characters, like there's no ambiguity, but they're now being identified from a distance. It's no longer Itkovian and Carnatus. It's no longer sort of like the Destriad and Shield Anvil. It's they're just the two soldiers.
And I stay with that because as they're moving down, they can see their breaths as opposed to one or the other. Yeah, so it's kind of it's pulling back to provide room for the third character who's about to come in.
It's interesting you mentioned breaths, because that bugs me.
Because it's dark, right?
Well, it's dark, and also they can see their breaths plural instead of they can see their breath.
Well, that's probably a cultural thing, specific between Canadian diction or Canadian lexicon. I've noticed that. I've noticed that in reading books by British authors. They used to sort of make me, it would jump out when I didn't. It's like toward and towards.
Okay.
Because from Canada, it's towards. And I had to learn very quickly with my English editor that no, it's toward, you colonial. So I think that's the stylistic tick for sure.
But it's one of those really weird little tiny things, and I'm sure like for an American reader, seeing like the word color with a U in it is the same sort of thing, that it's irrational, that but it sticks out. And
I have a perpetual war with Microsoft Word on all of those ones, because if you go, if you choose Canadian, suddenly you're getting all this really weird French stuff showing up. And it's like, no, that's not English, sorry. So yeah, I have to actually basically, occasionally I go through the spell checker and add, the OURs and everything, or the double L's. But that's always document specific. So I have to do it freaking all over again for the next document. It really ticks me off. But anyways.
But one of the things I wanted to mention just about this transitionary section, this paragraph, the first one, was again the idea of the slicked limed steps, streams trickling down. So even with this just description of the walking down, the scene is realized that it's not just a description of the visual, that there's that tactile slickness, the streams trickling because of that use of trickling gives it that motion within the stillness of the description. It just gives it slightly more life. And by combining elements of visual, of sound, of tactile, it makes the entire description much more immersive. And I think that's something that a lot of authors overlook, because we think often of narratives as a film playing in your head. That you read this and you're designing a film, and it's almost like you're visualizing it. So everything is audio visual. It's about hearing the dialogue. It's about seeing what's on the screen. And we overlook quite often the ability of text to have that additional sensory information, because our brains can then create a more 3D picture of, or multi-sensory image in our heads, which just make it that much more real and immersive when you're reading it.
Make it or makes it? Sorry. Yeah, and I guess in some ways, because reading, I think, is almost falling to the wayside in terms of entertainment for the masses, as it were. That the shorthand of the visual is almost all that's needed quite often, I think, at least in the minds of us as readers, because film and television is flowing its way and seeped its way into written narrative, into prose. It's all, you know, even we talked about transitions, and I remember this from, I've probably used this example before, but I have in workshops for sure, is the shorthand that is part of the evolution of our entertainment sphere. And if you look at a 1940s film with a man waking up on a bed in a hotel room, and the camera watches him get up, get dressed, go into the bathroom, shave, tie his tie on, put his shoes on, walk outside, walk down the steps, or rather go down the elevator, step out into the lobby, cross the lobby, walk down the steps, and stand out front, hail a cab, and get into a cab. And in the 1930s and 40s, you would see all of those scenes. And now the shorthand is such that, because as viewers, we have been trained to actually link up things just by that kind of filling in the empty gaps. So now you can have a character with a close-up of their eyes opening on a pillow, like the pillow around them, eyes opening, and then cut, and then he's getting into the cab. You know, it can be that quick. And that's what's happened with film, is that everything is now so much shorthand, and so many gaps are just filled. Those transitions are actually have almost been dispensed with, unless they serve a different purpose.
And interestingly, the film Inception played with exactly that concept in one scene, where the characters are talking, and then they're in another scene and they're carrying on the conversation, which we are so used to in cinema. When you logically think about it, it's, you know, someone gets in a car and they start a conversation, and then they're 50 miles down the road and they're on to the next bit of the conversation. And if you think about it, you go, what, were you silent for the last 50 miles? You were just driving going, we're not carrying on this conversation until we hit the next town. And yet, so in Inception, they played with that we accept that narrative conceit of just chopping out a huge transition of time and carrying on with the narrative.
Yeah.
But as soon as you think about it, as soon as you pause the film in that moment and actually think about what has just transpired and the implied time that has passed, the conversation no longer makes sense. And it's such a curious thing. It's a narrative contrivance and artificiality that we all accept so readily until someone points it out. And obviously people don't point it out in a narrative unless they're doing something like that scene in Inception, where it's going to be used to prove a point.
Yeah. Yeah. And or now, if you have a character begin a conversation and then with another character, they both get in the car you might get a scene where they're sitting and they're driving and there's not a word being said. And what that does, that is a kind of transition. That's saying that whatever that conversation was that was started is fraught and emotional enough that neither one's going to say a fucking word to each other until one of them triggers the next one, right? The next conversation. So you can mess around with sort of the emotional context of things through the transitions as well, for sure.
Although, just as an aside, what I've always hated in films is when you have the character sorry, it's got an American car, so they'll be here. So the character is driving and they have a conversation.
Yeah, it drives you crazy, doesn't it?
While driving. And
yeah.
Oh yeah. And then they do the casual, they look back for a split second and then turn back to their conversation.
Yeah.
And every time my knuckles get tight and I'm like, look at the road. Stop having the conversation and look at the road.
Yeah.
And I cannot watch that without it immediately throwing me out of the narrative, because it is the artificiality of someone not watching where they are driving.
Yeah. And of course it has been deconstructed and played on where, accidents occur. There's things in the road that they've missed because they've been staring at the other person. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's such an obvious one that we see all the time.
I know, and it's so annoying, isn't it? Because think of our insane drive from Missoula to Victoria all in one day. We had plenty of conversations, especially you complaining about your bladder about to burst. But I don't think I ever turned and looked at you. I mean, why would I? You're sitting there. I got to keep my eyes on the road.
Yeah, but even if you wanted to like convey emotion stuff, there are things you can actually do with, if the driver is focused that way and the other person who, you're sitting chatting, so you're generally both watching the traffic, but the other person can look over. Yeah. And because the driver can't see the expression on their face, but the camera can, you can actually play a lot more with that than this artificial, oh yes, although we happen to be in a car, we're going to conduct a conversation as normal where we look at each other.
Yeah, I agree. It needs to be done. Somebody needs to shoot a proper conversation in a car, don't they?
I think a lot of filmmakers actually do it properly now, but it is just one of those artificial ones that drives me nuts.
No, we were watching something last night and watched the same thing. The guy just looking over way too freaking often. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back to what we're actually meant to be doing.
Well, we were talking transitions, so because the car is the obvious visual transition in film and television from one place to the next.
So we have them, they walk down the stairs, they go out into the central round hall. And I like something like this, and this is like, it's a subtle thing that is in the written text, and you miss things like this in the audiobook version. But round hall is actually capitalized. So it's a proper noun. It's the name of this. It's not into the central round hall where you're not emphasizing the fact that it was the central, the round hall as a place. It's formal, and that formality is communicated because it has a name.
Yeah.
And here we meet the third of the triumvirate, Bruchalion.
Yeah. And talk about foreshadowing, right? Motionless before the hearth and almost spectral, despite his formidable height and build. Yeah.
And weirdly enough, the description of Bruchalion reminded me, or was at least slightly reminiscent of Calor.
Yeah.
But it was one of those curious things that for some reason Bruchalion in my head and Calor were actually quite similar. I don't know why I did that.
No, I mean, for me, I would have thought Anomander Rake. It's the same thing. We're not going to get this guy's point of view, I don't think. And so he's going to be kept remote. And so that's how we see him when we first see him.
So we have obviously a discussion between the three of them. but primarily between Bruchalion and Carnatus, where Itkovian kind of just takes a back seat to it all.
Yeah, and just to step back a bit, the detail, for example, the squealing door is what informs Bruchalion that they've arrived, so he doesn't have to turn around, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But again, this actually is a nice callback to one of the scenes that even made it into the David Lynch movie, or the David Lynch version of Dune, where Paul is sitting with his back to the door and he recognizes the footsteps. Mm-hmm. That you have this in films all the time, where someone is staring out of the way and someone arrives in the background and they know who it is. And it was one of the things I liked about that scene in Dune, was the fact that Paul had to explain, no, I recognized your footsteps. And there was a reason for it. And it was worked into that. So I like when there are clues and cues within the text that explain why a character who is not looking at them knows they are there. It's dropping in that thing about the squealing door. It's a couple of extra words, but suddenly the scene doesn't feel artificial. It doesn't feel like a drama production where it's, and now they have entered on cue. Hello. It just feels much more natural.
Yeah, and so Bruchalion is only concerned about, at least initially, the reports of what's going on outside the city. So it's all tactical. It's all strategic stuff as commander.
Well, and he's also he's a little concerned about the rise of Trick or Treach. It's kind of, this guy's muscling in on our territory. Carnatus keeps coming across as the aggressive one. So I like how, and that has been there all the way through.
Yeah.
So it's nice and consistent about his character that he is aggressive, he is martial, that he is a personification of that aggressiveness of battle. The belligerence, if you will.
Carnatus. Yeah, because Bruchalion's, he's not bothered by it.
Yeah, because Bruchalion is
more philosophical, actually.
Yeah, because he tells Carnatus off, an unworthy rivalry, sir. The season of summer is home to more than one voice of war. Or would you now challenge the fierce spirit? This idea of, what has this got to do with us? War is war, and we worship this aspect of it, but there's lots of war to go around.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you a curious thing that I like. The season of summer being used as a synonym for war.
Well, and of course that goes right back to ancient times, right? Because once you did the planting, then you were available to be made into armies and marched off somewhere. But at the end of the summer, you got to come back and harvest, or everybody starves, right? So,
but it's a little detail like that. Is something, again, it's these things that get added in, and they're only a couple of words here and there, and not everyone is going to pick up on it or even enjoy it. But for me, those little details add such depth and meaning to what is being discussed, to the verisimilitudinous nature of the world, that it gives it that sense of history and that sense of immersive believability.
As opposed to some fantasy films where the great city is sitting there on a plain and there's nobody's growing any crops or hurting any animals or anything around the city.
Well, and it's like, curiously, in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the city of Gondor, as it is described in the book, has all of these farms outside Gondor. Like the area surrounding Gondor is covered in agricultural land.
Yeah.
But in the film version,
Yeah, it's
not
gone.
a farm to be seen.
Not a farm to be seen. Yeah.
And it's such a curious omission. It's a bit like so many medieval or fantasy fortifications. And when we see them in modern film, none of them have ditches in front of the walls.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that's it is one of the simplest forms of fortification, is one of the easiest forms of fortification, and it's incredibly useful.
Well, it serves another purpose. Basically, you want water running in it. And I remember in the UK, shortly after, I guess, Gardens of the Moon came out, and I was able to actually buy a new car for the first time ever. And so I bought a 1999 Mini Cooper S. And the writer David Keck, whom I know from Winnipeg, was actually taking a master's in writing Norwich, I guess, the big one, the good school in the UK. Anyway, so he met up with us when we were living in Surrey, and we all, he's tall, but piled him into the car, and we all drove off, and we went to Arundel, the big castle that's on the River Arun. And because Dave Keck is just a fanatic regarding castles. And so I remember we all piled out, and they all went to sort of look at the castle, and I went straight around to the back of the castle. And eventually Keck found me because I was rummaging around at the base of a chute to what would have been the kitchen, I guess, and finding artifacts in the rubbish that was at the base of that chute, because that's where, and it was in the ditch, and that's where all of the refuse of the kitchens, food and all the rest, and waste and everything else would be emptying into, because you have to get rid of it somehow. I remember finding a great boar's tusk down in that mess of stuff, and broken, china and that kind of stuff. But yes, you need those ditches to actually get rid of garbage and refuse and sewage and all the rest. So it was never pleasant, for a soldier to run into that ditch and wade across it, because it would have stunk to high heaven, and the chances of disease would have been, through the roof. So yeah, I know what you mean. All the shortcuts.
But we have that nice where Bruchalion in this obviously slight castigation of Carnatus, because Carnatus does not take the point that Bruchalion doesn't want this brought up about a rivalry with Treach or anything like that. Carnatus keeps going, and eventually has to almost like shut Carnatus down. Bruchalion has to shut Carnatus down, because Carnatus offers the argument: first heroes are not gods. They're not even tribal spirits, sir. Have any of the other priests supported Rathtrake's claim? This very pompous, holier than thou attitude. And Bruchalion goes, no. Carnatus, I thought as, of course, Bruchalion went on, they're also not convinced that the Panian Doman intends to lay siege to Capistan.
Yeah.
And Carnatus has fallen into the trap, because anyone could have said that, you could have seen from Carnatus's own perspective, he does not trust the Council of Masks. He knows that there's all this secular infighting. Yeah. This was the wrong argument to take. So we get Bruchalion being smarter, Bruchalion being faster on his feet rhetorically, but Carnatus being the warrior charging in, kind of aggressive. And it comes across in that little exchange.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think even the fact that we don't have Bruchalion pacing, we don't have him, he's just standing, he's quite still, again, foreshadows everything about Bruchalion that we're going to need. So for the writer, you know, if you're going to introduce a character who is going to have a fated conclusion to their existence, make sure, or not make sure, but make that opening scene tell everything that you as the writer needs to know about that character, because that then becomes your guiding point. That's where everything starts, and then you can follow that character through. So, you know, if I'd had Brucalion pacing nervously, drinking, you know, from a goblet of wine, or eating, you know, at a table full of, you know, bones and feathers and all the rest, that would not fit for who Brucalion was going to be in the story. So in that sense, the writer needs to know the character before the character arrives on the page.
And what I like here is Brucalion also, like, he displays little rhetorical flourishes. So when he speaks to, because after shutting down Carnatus, his gaze flicked to Itcovian. Are your wings unfurled, shield anvil? And it's that he referred to the wings as being what they, obviously the unit that he's commanding, he's going to be given 2 wings. But I just like that, unfurled, and you just go, it's just nice.
Well, and I wanted to sort of really convey that almost poetic element to their diction, because we've got, of all the people to contact them from the Malazans, we end up with Quickbed. So, right, the complete opposite, and that's what I wanted to play off of for sure. So, you know, even in writing this, I guess the first draft, probably I was starting to realize that I was going to go very formalistic in the Grey Swords, and that I was going to sort of introduce something that was kind of decidedly un-Malazan at this point in the third book, because they are quite unique as a company.
Yeah, I mean, when we compare it to the portrayal of other mercenary companies that we hear about in fantasy, like, it's very rare that a mercenary company is a religious order. And weirdly enough, one of the other writers that I like, David Gemmell, this was in his Draenei books, that the 30 were a religious order that would turn up for these grand battles, because their whole raison d'etre was to find a noble, unwinnable battle to help defend. That was what they did. So there are very few instances where you get the both mercenary but also religious. Lots of mercenary companies, lots of religious armies, but very rarely do you have the two combined.
Yeah, but it made sense, because what are mercenaries but people in service to the god of war, right? So, and since I have a god of war, then, you know, it needs to be, it has to be an order. It has to be religious. The other mercenary companies are just, you know, playing at it. These guys are for real.
And again, you've used, because they are worshippers of Fenner, you've had that, what was it, his spiny rump, bristled hump.
Oh, his spiny rump. What are you talking about? Bristly hump.
Bristly hump, and then the twin.
The spiny rump comes later. Yeah.
The twin tusks guard you, and again, you know, capitalizing it because this is a formal blessing.
Yeah.
You know, it's little tiny things like that in the text actually are nice signposts to a reader.
And this is the first time we find out that Carnatus as Destriant is a priest, right? Yeah. Because after Covian is dismissed, Brucalion turns to Carnatus and calls him dear priest.
And again, so that's now filling us in more of what the Destriant is.
Yeah, exactly. Because you've already been able to work out, I think, you know, that, you know, Covian as shield anvil is not averse to taking out companies on patrols. But the word Destriant has been hanging there for the reader for, you know, half a page or 2 pages, whatever. But so time, you know, if I'd left it and just didn't really give us any other kind of synonym for it or whatever, then that could have been irritating, I think, for the reader. So I have to sort of, at this point, is the time when I have to sort of attach something else to that title, something that we can all understand. And then that sets up the triangle a little bit clearer.
Mm-hmm. And with that sort of in mind, where you have you know, this debate over, should we accept this invitation? We don't know who it's from. What if it's an enemy? And so Carnatus says, sir, then perhaps we call in a main in case we invite an enemy into our midst. So again, using a term main, obviously from Fenner and referring to a part of Fenner, that it doesn't matter what a main is. It's either a unit or some sort of wizard, or, you know, it doesn't matter. What matters is you can actually get the context from the word.
And then, of course, Carnatus is sensing that this isn't just one person contacting them. It's like lots of people, kind of. Yeah. Well, which is really setting up, you know, everything about, we're going to find out later about.
But sorry, before we get to that point,
okay.
It's where Bruchalion says Carnatus doesn't need to worry about this. Destriant, you forget, I am Fenner's own weapon. So you confirm mortal sword. You've confirmed that Destriant is a priest. You have now confirmed that mortal sword is in fact a martial, dangerous position. And even though Bruchalion has just been standing there, there's a sense of menace attached to him, or at least a sense of competency with weaponry that is coming across here. So even if you've thought of him as like this old priest who's standing there because it's a religious order, or he's just an old general, you now suddenly are confronted with, actually, he might be a badass. It sort of elevates his threat level within the text.
Which is why your first appearance, or his first appearance on the page, is similar to Anomander Rake, right? He is badass. And of course, curiously, if you think about it, in this scene, we've had both the Destriant as priest and Bruchalion as Fenner's own sword, own weapon. We don't have anything to attach to the shield anvil, because that one is going to be left and is going to be, I guess, central to actually the whole story of the Grey Swords. So this is a case where you hold off on the important thing. And you can give simple definitions for the other two, but the other one's going to be a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, and again, there's sometimes withholding information from the reader is sometimes a very welcome thing, because it invites mystery. It's an invitation to read on, to read further, to find out more. And other times I get the withholding of information, because that is what this is. You have withheld information about who and what Ecovian is.
Yeah.
And sometimes that withholding can feel frustrating for a reader. But this again comes down to one of those things that you cannot predict how individual readers will react. You can look at it and go, but this is the technique, and I am giving you X, Y in this scene, and I'm going to withhold Z. And a lot of readers could go, oh yeah, that's absolutely fine. But some readers go, no, I want Z as well, and I am frustrated. So the idea of withholding information from a reader is not necessarily bad in and of itself. Again, it's a technique, and how that technique is applied and used is partly what the author is doing, but also partly on how a reader is interpreting it. And the author can only control one of those things.
Well, but you can control it in a number of different ways. I mean, I had Itcovian escort Carnatus down to Bruchalion, and then Bruchalion kicks Itcovian out of the room. So he's no longer there, right? So there is no opportunity to do Destriant priest or Brucalian, God's own weapon, right? There's no opportunity because of COVID and it's gone now. So in that sense, the physical movement of the characters actually is conveying that, no, we're going to hold off in Eccovian. We don't see him yet. We only had him as this transition between the two. And so you're actually using a mystery figure to pull up the two characters you're going to use in your scene. So
yeah, but again, you're withholding information about Eccovian because you could have inserted something earlier on where you did the, expand upon what a shield anvil is.
Mm-hmm.
You have a reason for it, fine, but you're still withholding that information. You've designed a scene where you're withholding that information. And for some readers, that's what I'm saying, that some readers will look at that and go, the author is just withholding the information for the sake of withholding it because he doesn't want to talk about what a shield anvil is yet.
Whereas in workshops, one of the things one talks about to student writers is that which you withhold is often just as important as that you put in and onto the page. And you need to be conscious of the effects of the two and how you can actually make use of that to create a psychological impact to the reader. Yeah.
And here we talk about the same where you talk about sort of negative space and where a character can be present without actually being physically present because there's an assumption on behalf of the reader when they're reading the scene about a character. There's all sorts of different things that you can play with that play into what is being declared and what is being withheld.
Yeah.
But I just thought it's an interesting point because, again, it's a balance between what an author is doing or what an author is trying to do and what a reader is doing. That there's only certain things an author can control. And one of them is you cannot control reader response 100%.
Yeah.
You can do as much of the work as you can to lay out, this is the technique I'm using, this is why I'm using it, this is the response I expect to get. But you will never know how individual readers will respond.
No. And I noticed in this paragraph where Carnatus strides to the cleared space in the chamber. This is one of those cases of, if you're going to then create in that paragraph, some magic takes place. And my argument would be, if you're going to do this, have everything wrapped around it, being mundane and normal, something that's easily recognizable. So he folds back the sodden sleeves of his shirt and then makes a slight gesture with his left hand. So the sleeves and all the rest, those are all mundane details. And then comes the light. So then comes the magic.
And one of the details here that I liked, so you had the sodden sleeves of his shirt and then the slight gesture. So again, the sibilance and the repetition of the S sign is quite nice. But the fact that the sleeves were sodden, because it was a recognition, he'd been standing up on the wall all night and then walking down. So he'd been exposed to the elements, and then there's even a potential he's starting to sweat because now he's in a room next to a big burning fire.
Yeah, he's just early on, he pulled off his cloak too, didn't he? His dripping cloak. Yeah. So again, for the writer, these are all sort of normal, regular gestures, but they're ones that make sense for where he has gone into this room. But you don't have to do it all at once, right? He can't. He doesn't walk into the room and shrug off the cloak, roll up his sodden sleeves, or shake, squeeze out the water from them, and then take off his shoes and put his bare feet in front of the fire. You can actually take your time in terms of, and so these normal gestures are part of using exposition to actually link sort of the events that are occurring. But you just release them out when they're needed for the specific moments. I mean, his only reason to roll up the sleeves is to then trigger this magic, right? And the idea of rolling up your sleeves to do some work, right? So Yeah, in other words, tie the gestures into the specific thing you want to then evoke at that moment. So, and that's the great thing is you set up your scene and you got all this. You got the rain, you got the dark, it's near dawn. You got the trickling water down the stairs. So we know water is all through all this stuff. And that's like sort of a list that you can then pluck from as you work your way through the scene to bring those details back in and back in and back in, which then just sort of connects everything up through the narrative.
And so let's move on now to actually look at this exchange with Quickben. So one of the first things is it's in the language of Fenner's Reeve. Reeve or Reve?
Reeve.
Yeah, I thought so. So in the language of Fenner's Reeve, intimating a certain knowledge of our company and its immortal benefactor, there is a message intended in such knowing. And the message is, such knowledge suggests arrogance in the sender, or indeed it offers us a hint of brotherhood. And I really like that, because when it's revealed that because the reader knows that this is Quickben's message that he's sent to the city. We're expecting someone.
Does the reader know yet
that
it's going to be Quickben? Yeah? Okay.
Because he had said that he was going to do this.
Okay.
And so when it is confirmed Quickben, you're like, oh, this is one of those moments where you mightn't have known that this was Quickben, but as soon as you go, oh, that was the thing that Quickben said earlier.
Yeah.
But so I like that the arrogance in the sender, because when you realize it's Quickben, you go, yep, that sounds like something Quickben would do.
Yeah, but also the other option, of course, is that he has knowledge of inner workings of the priesthood of Fenner, which adds to the mystery, because it's obviously a bit of both.
And also then the point that you'd raised earlier, there are souls within this, not 2 or 3, a dozen, maybe more, yet they are bound within one. I have not seen its like before. So when it's confirmed that it's Quickben, you're like, people keep bringing this up about Quickben, that there's something different about him, that there's something strange about him, that frequently he's associated with the smell of spice. And we only ever see that with basically one other type of thing in the Malazan universe.
You think?
Which adds to the mystery of Quickben while still giving the reader information.
Yeah.
A figure sitting cross-legged slowly took form within the orb, dark-skinned, lean, wearing light leather armor. The man's face showed an expression of mild surprise. And then his dark eyes had a lurid glow. So because the perspective is with Carnatus, and he's looking at someone he distrusts, the shining of light in Quickben's eyes is described as lurid, which is obviously not necessarily a good thing. Slightly pejorative, which I like, because it shows distrust.
Yeah. So again, you tie into the point of view, right? So you're playing on, the reader knows Quickben, but you want to create that sort of, well, what would it be like to see Quickben and meet Quickben for the first time? And that sort of echoes the first time, the reader met Quickben. So, yeah. It's kind of an invitation to the reader, because Carnatus is new to us and we're not even sure if we like him yet. So,
what I like about this is, even if the reader has not picked up that this is Quickben by this point, it's only a couple of paragraphs down where you have Quickben formally introduce himself as a Daphon Ben Dalat. To make things simpler, call me Quickben. So this is, again, it's one of these instances where, yes, we've talked about this before. I don't like it where you make us travel all the way down a significant period of time to find the name, and then I go back up and I reread the section. But I think the older I've gotten, I don't mind it as much, because you go, well, yeah, I'll just go back to the start of the thing and read through. I don't need to read it all at once and have all the information at once. Rereading a page is not going to kill me.
And we're tied into the point of view of Carnatus. So, you know, I got to stick to that point of view. And so when Quickben introduces himself, it's in his own time. It's not in anyone else's time. It's not for the benefit of the reader. It's for the benefit of Carnatus and Bruchalion. And if you note, he has to get a whole bunch of information and details out of the way before he even feels comfortable enough to introduce himself. And so that's important, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to him doing it immediately. He's got to fish for a little bit in the pond.
And you know, that's quite often a lot of these exchanges are because there's no reason for someone to give their name before the point where you have inserted it into the text. It's never, my complaint is rarely about that. It's that as a reader, sometimes when I'm reading through, I go, oh God, who, right, it's that name, right, go back. And it's negotiating between the verisimilitudinous nature of exchanges and the artificiality of what's demanded in narrative. And obviously that can be in tension rather than mutually supportive at times. And, you know, this is just one of those things that you try to balance.
Mm.
And so
he's assuming that Bruchalion is the city's ruler. And of course that has to be, so yeah, they have to sort of identify themselves.
And that's, we have this, first of all, they argue about language, and then Quickben shows off how smart he is with, that's an awkward dialect with Daru, the obvious mother. Can you understand me now, sort of thing. And it's
yeah, that's Quickben.
And then you see that he turns the tables on Bruchalion and Carnatus, because he gets them to answer a lot of questions first to figure out who they are without giving away who he is.
Yeah.
And it's only,
and I mean, the deflection of that particular weaving in my warrens has a way of reflecting those who stumble on it, though only among priests, of course, the target it was intended to. I mean, that's just bullshit, right? It's just typical Quickben. Yeah.
Yeah, because well, he lies a lot.
Yeah.
And also he has no reason to trust them because he still hasn't figured out who they are yet. So he's trying to seem more powerful and wiser and than they are, because if you don't know who you're talking to, it's better to be the big dog.
Yep. Yeah.
So again, they keep. We've gone through.
Oh no, let's stick with that, because we've got no Bruchalion rumbled. We are not. And Quickben, go on, please. I'm truly intrigued now. And of course, you're right. That's all power play stuff. That's all. Oh, you're here to entertain me because I'm Quickben. But look at Bruchalion's reply. Can you see it?
Where it's what they pleased to hear it, sir.
Yeah.
The mortal sword replied, stepping forward. But
yeah,
this
completely
is
ironic. Yeah.
But this is really sort of Bruchalion stepping in because Carnatus is not being effective in dealing with Quickben.
Yeah. Yeah. So Quickben's psychological games has worked on Carnatus, but it's not worked on Bruchalion. Yeah.
And that's because you get that your invitation has been answered by Destrian Carnatus, who stands beside me at my request. I command the grey swords.
And then Quickben attempts to undermine all that again. Mercenaries, yes.
And weirdly enough, Bruchalion falls for it because now Quickben's using a different technique.
He is. Yeah.
So instead of, you know, sort of tricking them into answering questions, and now it's, oh God, fuck, just mercenaries. And Bruchalion's honor and need to defend who they are swings to the fore, and he gives away a whole load of tactical information that he should.
Well, he info dumps but he info dumps not for the purpose of, I mean, obviously tangentially for the purpose of the reader, but no, it's for the purpose of actually putting Quickbed in his place and defending his choices as a gray sword, as a mercenary. So yeah, he's been stung to provide this information as if you were talking to a child, right? So it has these other functions, these other purposes that are part of the scene that's being created and the characterization that's being created, even though it's an info dump, right? So,
and we get a lot of information about how they are building up their numbers.
mm-hmm.
So this is all a lot of information, but again, this is a very Bruchalion shouldn't be giving this information away to a stranger.
No.
And this is all about how Quickbed just messes with people to try and get the thing. But we then have, once he realizes actually we can deal with them, that's when he introduces himself. Because he goes, how rude of me. And we have that introduction. But what I really like is he says that I'm with Kaladin Brood. And he doesn't reveal that he's in the Malazan army.
No, not at all.
Um,
Mercenaries and the Malazan Empire do not mix, because think Crimson Guard, right?
Yeah. So this is like very quick thinking on Quickben's part. And it's actually quite humorous. It's humorous for us because we look at that and go, oh, he's saying he's with Kaladin Brood, not with the Malazans. And then we have Bruchalion sort of going, oh yes, a warlord who leads an army against an invading empire. And you can just imagine Quickben's going, oh shit.
And the other information drop there is we've heard that name since coming north. So they've come from the south.
Yeah. So this is, I thought this was a very nice exchange because it reveals a lot about how Quickben operates. Half con man, half powerful mage.
Yeah.
That it gives us a lot more consolidation of both Carnatus as a slightly simpler sort of priest warrior, but Bruchalion as a commanding warrior priest. But it sort of consolidates them, and we get a stronger sense of who they are as characters. You have Etkovian has been hinted at, and we have a complicated but very vague image of who Etkovian is, and he's now left. And we now have this building up of a potential relationship between the Malazans and the Grey Swords.
Yeah, and again, as a narrative, you want, and points of view, and what you choose for points of view is you want to play with hierarchy. And quite often, especially in fantasy novels, your points of view are the leader of the army or the prince or the king or all of these things. So kind of top dog in some fashion or another. But this point of view in this opening section is not the top dog. It's Carnatus. And so he's there to sort of provide a reflective kind of shaping of Bruchalion. But as you say, Bruchalion takes over the scene in the discussions with Quickbed, which has then our narrator, Carnatus, drop right out in a sense, that he is simply the witness now to this. And so he has become the invisible narrator, taking my place. And that can be really useful at when you're writing to, if you recognize that you're going to write a style that makes you as a narrator invisible, you can then use characters to then repeat the process when needed, which then, in a sense, reinforces the hierarchy that you've established with the characters. like Bruchalion as commander, and negotiating with Quickben, who we know, would make the greatest diplomat ever. So the Prince of Lies, if you will. So that's that. So for writers, just because you're holding to a particular point of view in a character does not mean that character has to actually dominate the scene. That they can take a step back, and that allows you then to deliver all other kinds of information and characterizations in a kind of almost see-through language, unless you then, occasionally you then break into some internal thoughts if you want to bring it back to your point of view character. But in this case, there's no point, there's no reason to, because the exchange between Bruchalion and Quickben is so loaded with information already, some of which we know and some of which we don't. Like, we know more about the Quickben side of things than we do about the Bruchalion side of things. So that needs to be, the imbalance needs to be redressed at this point. This is why the point of view is not from Quickben, it's from the Grey Swords, because that's the information I need to convey.
And what I liked, just to move down to kind of just conclude this section, is that this has been quite a serious discussion, and although we've seen Quickben being playful, there's been a lot of information here for the reader. But I like how Quickben finishes the magical phone call with the line, "I'll need a bigger tent." And it's just dropping a little bit of humor in at the end. So it just lightens the tone again, and it's a bit of relief for the reader.
Yeah, because we're not going to find much of that with the Grey Swords at all. Yeah.
But also, it's Quickben's irreverence that he is, again, like sometimes he can be quite like a sort of trickster character. So that irreverence coming through of like, "I'll need a bigger tent." It's just this nice moment of levity that I enjoyed. And so then we finish it all off, and then we have, as would be natural in this, Quickben has left, the spheres disappeared, and
Debrief.
Yeah, Bruchalion and Carnatus now discuss who they were just talking to, what all of this means, and it's that nice way to conclude it and provide a summary of some important information for the reader again.
Yeah, and we wrap back around to Carnatus as the point of interest at this point, because he's what opened the scene, so we have to come back to him in that sense. But also, we're acknowledging that Bruchalion was well aware that Carnatus took a step back during the exchange, and now wants his reading on the situation because he was able to take a step back. Yeah, so it's tactical as well.
Yeah. So and again, that shows, even though we think Quickben was getting the best of them, but Bruchalion and Carnatus had their own game running. That, yes, this was a tactic that they were employing as well. Yeah. So it speaks to, again, they weren't fully fooled and they weren't gulled entirely by Quickben. It again just adds and consolidates to their competency as commanders.
Yeah, and if Carnatus is the one who's already shown in the scene that he is hyper aware of political gambits and games being played, then that's the guy who you want witnessing quietly an exchange like this. Yeah. So in other words, Bruchalion's calling upon the natural traits of Carnatus and his talents and his intellect in that respect, which is what a good commander should be doing, one thinks.
Well, one would hope.
Yeah.
So now that we've run through that scene, why don't we end it here? We can come back and do another scene another time. So just thank you so much for chatting with me and going through this. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been fun.
And thank you so much to all of you who are watching. Greatly appreciate it. If you would like Steve and I to look at a different scene, if you could leave the chapter and a brief description of the scene. If it is further along than this book, can you please make sure that you put spoiler with the book name and take a couple of extra lines in the comments, please? just so you don't spoil it for other people, and then put in the details about the scene. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.